Let's now listen to Swami Kriyanandaji on the topic for today, purity of heart. This is just about 5 minutes long.
Om Namo Narayana, 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 Om Namo Narayana. I bow to Lord Narayana. I bow to him in each of you, because you are all manifestations of that same one God. And you know, being a disciple of a great guru did not limit me, expanded my love. It isn't that I thought I only know God in this form. He helped me to see it in every blade of grass and to bow to that God in everyone. And he was that way. He set that example. Now, one of the frustrating things about giving this program is that it happens again and again. I don't prepare my programs. I just talk, but somehow I seem to intuit what I'm going to be doing next, because I just talked yesterday about just what I'm going to read to you today. How frustrating. But I've got this book all prepared with sayings, and I want to use only this book as the foundation, and the book ends up just perfectly for 365 days. So you're stuck with hearing the same thing, but it's, after all, a beautiful truth all the same. And this is saying from Conversations with Yogananda, number 141. The Master remarked during his later years, to my first generation of students, I didn't say much about a vegetarian diet. It was too unusual then for the people in this country, meaning America. Diet was secondary in importance anyway to the teachings of yoga. For the next generation, I recommended that they eat less meat. Most of them, on an average, became healthier. For this third generation, I've recommended a completely vegetarian diet and find that of the three groups, the present one is the most healthy. I don't care much, however, for that word vegetarian. Too many people are fanatics on the subject. I've coined what I consider a better word, proper-etarian. And he just wanted us to eat properly, and that sometimes meant eating according to the needs of the moment. If you had to either eat meat or starve to death, he would certainly say eat meat. It's not that important. I talked last time about the necessity for getting away from these kind of superstitious ideas of this can make you impure, that can make you impure. Forget that. The most important thing, yes, you follow your customs. I'm not trying to take you away from them, but remember, the most important thing is to have a pure heart. What is a pure heart? Well, I said love God. It also means a heart. What is impure? If I get my hands full of earth, they're dirty. But the earth grows vegetables, the earth grows fruit trees. There's nothing wrong with earth. It's not dirty or impure where it belongs as soil. Dirt doesn't belong, or earth doesn't belong on my hands, therefore we call it impure, we call it dirt. So impurity means that which does not belong in your heart. What does not belong in your heart is desires for that which will take you away from who you are instead of toward it. So the more impure desires are called tamasic desires. There is tamasic food, like stale food, excessively spicy food, food that is pungent, excessively pungent, and overcooked food. These things where there's no life in it, you're just getting bulk but no energy. This is a tamasic diet. Rajasic diet is that which energizes you. And there are certain foods like garlic and onions and so on, which make you more energized. I think that in this very Rajasic age, if you have to deal with businessmen and everything, then there's nothing wrong with with a diet of garlic and onion, because that helps to. You have to be somewhat Rajasic to deal with a Rajasic world. If you're able to live in the forests or in a distant ashram in the desert or whatever, and if you can really be completely sattvic in your attitudes and diet, then that's good. But you can't do that in the cities. So you have to make that compromise. Just don't make too much of a compromise. Then sattvic diet, of course, is fresh food, fruits, things that grow up above the ground primarily. All of these things are good for you, but in the long run, even they don't matter. Purity is not just diet. Purity is those things which take you toward God, which is not just food. I have known many demonic people, or perhaps that's not the right word, but not spiritual people, who are very careful about their diet, but they aren't careful about their hearts. What really makes impurity is unkindness, meanness. People who can be rude to others, don't imagine that God is pleased. If you cannot win people, you will not be able to win God's love.
Good morning again. This is such a wonderful topic and so nice to hear from Swamiji in the mornings like this. With purity of heart, it says in the Bible, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." Purity of heart means, as Swamiji is saying, there's no desires there. There's nothing that's blocking between you and God. There's nothing that you want more than the divine, the desires and attachments and all the things that pull us outside of ourselves, that they're no longer there. And I was remembering the beautiful images of the visionaries, the children visionaries who they were very young, and some saw the Divine Mother or Mary for many years, some decades. Some are still seeing Garabandal and Medjugorje. There was Fatima, there was Lourdes, where these children were just caught up in ecstasy, and they stopped breathing. They were in an ecstatic state because of their purity, because of their love for God. I was thinking of Saint Teresa of Avila, and there is in Rome, I saw this when I lived in Italy, a beautiful statue of Bernini, by Bernini, of her in ecstasy, where there's an angel who's piercing her heart. And that means that her desires were just taken away. And it was said that she used to have to hold on a chair so that she wouldn't lift up in levitation, because she was so uplifted from having no things pulling her, attaching her to this world. It was the same with Padre Pio. He would do the Mass, and he would hold up the Mass, the Eucharist, the wafer, and he would just be gone and just ecstatic union with God and communion, true communion with God. And these masses would go on for a couple of hours, and people would think it was normally like half hour. People would think, well, come on, Padre Pio. But he was just in love with God. And this is the direction that we are heading in, of releasing things. I remember when I first came onto the path, I took all my old pictures and from that old life and how I used to look and the things I used to do and those old friends and everything that wasn't me anymore. And I made a fire and I just threw them in the fire. And I just said, this isn't who I am anymore. I don't want those desires. I don't want that life anymore. And I was recalling recently Master's chant, "Door of my heart, open wide, I keep for thee." And this is the devotee is always just trying to open. In the beginning, it's a little bit, then okay, I'll open more. Okay, I'll open more. And then your heart at a certain point just naturally flies open. because there's nothing else holding you back. Master, when he found God, he said this himself, that he asked Divine Mother, why did it take so long? I've been calling you all this time. And she said there was just a few desires still left. I couldn't come. And Master had a wonderful vision of Divine Mother. It's talked about in the New Path, one of the Christmas meditations, where he's just looking at her and talking to her, and all the disciples are there, and he's just saying, how beautiful you are. Look how beautiful you are. Oh, please stay, stay. Oh, don't go. And he says, and they could hear one side of the conversation. He says, oh, the desires of these people, the materialistic desires, are taking you away. Don't go, please don't go. And this is the thing, it blocks us from God, these desires. But it says also in the Bible, suffer the little children. That means let the little children come unto me, because of such is the kingdom of heaven. And there was that wonderful story of Master with Swamiji. When Swamiji first came, he said he was over intellectual, always analyzing and trying to figure things out. And Master kept telling him to get devotion. So you know the story likely, that Master brought, one day he had Swamiji with him, and he had one of the nuns bring something he had gotten in town, and she brought it in a brown paper bag. And so then he looks at Swamiji, and he looks at the others in the room, and then he pulls out this little toy pistol, and it shoots sparks up in the air, and they all look in the air, and Swamiji, who was overly intellectual, was thinking, well, what's going on? The Master had another little toy, and it was shooting up a parachute up in the air. And then they all looked at it and watched it go down. And Swamiji thought, oh my God, what's going on? And Master looked at him so deeply, and he said, how do you like it, Walter? How do you like them? And Master Swamiji said, oh, they're fine, sir. I mean, he didn't know what to think. And that's when Master said, suffer the little children. He quoted from the Bible, let the little children come, because such is the kingdom of God. And so it's the desires that I want this and that. I remember as I was growing up, there were 5 kids in our family. And at Christmas time, you got to tell, when we were still believing in Santa, you got to tell Santa what you wanted, and we'd write it down, give it to our parents, and and then just imagine 5 kids wanting all these things. Oh, I want a bike. Oh, I want the skates. Oh, I want a volleyball. I want a kickball. All the kids were going like this the whole time, and my parents, they're going crazy. And that was fun then, and we did get many of those things. But then you get older and older, and the desires just get bigger, and they get bigger. And they get to be more and more. And this doesn't satisfy me. I want more and more. And you're not a kid anymore. This is the thing. The adults are still having all the desires. And so how do we try to release these desires? Well, there are many different ways people try. One is we try through, we can say fire ceremonies. Okay, so we have fire ceremony. But you have to be very focused to release attachments and desires through a fire ceremony. So many people are looking around, and Swamiji said when he used to live in India, people would be doing fire ceremonies and say, hey, give me more wood, and they're just totally unfocused on it. And also we can say by bathing in holy waters. I was baptized in the Baptist church, and that was wonderful, but that was so long ago. That's supposed to last your whole life. And we think bathing in holy waters, like in the Ganges, that's fine. And but then what Master said is your sins wait for you in the trees. And you come out and they jump back all over you again. And there was a humorous story of Mukunda. When he was young, he would go and bathe in holy waters, but he would be in ecstasy. And so one time he came out and he was just gone, and he was so gone that he left his clothing by the riverside, or he was completely naked then. So he was walking away, and then one of his aunts saw him, and they said, you, she scolded him. I think she even slapped him. And he said, the sin is in you, the sin is in you. And then he just went back easily and got his clothes and put them back on. But he just wasn't in that consciousness at all. And we think of, prayer. And we say, well, prayer, if I just pray enough. But most people can't pray. Master said it should be a powerful prayer, a prayer demand, a focused prayer. He said, after Kriya, prayer is 100 times as powerful as just praying with the thoughts and mind wandering all over. And prayer with deep devotion, but not going into a whole emotional thing. I grew up in a completely emotional church, and my grandmother's church, it was there on the wall, painted, be still and know that I am God. And I just would look at that and I go, yes, yes. Something inside of me just remembered that stillness, but nobody was still in that church. And that's the thing. We say these things work, but you have to really be focused in them for them to work. Now, on the spiritual path, on our path, we have a very powerful way of getting rid of those desires. That is tried, true. The masters have practiced it. Many great souls over thousands of years. Ancient techniques that the masters gave to their disciples, that Jesus gave to his disciples, Krishna gave to Babaji for thousands of years. These practices have been shown that they work. And the most powerful way for us is through Kriya Yoga, through our practice of Kriya. Now, what does Kriya do? It makes our spine into a big magnet, the spine and the chakras, the nadis, where the currents are flowing. You can imagine the spine initially, Master said, is spiritually paralyzed. Nothing can flow. There's so many desires and attachments, the energy can't flow. And you can imagine also like a hose that's kinked and curled, and you try to turn on the water to water your garden, nothing's going to come out. So we align the hose and Kriya through our practices of energy, energization, Mahamudra, Ananda Yoga. We align the spine, and then we introduce a powerful energy there, which makes the whole spine into a magnet. What does a magnet do? It pulls things toward it. The spine becomes so magnetic that it pulls away the energy that's going out to the senses, to the desires. I want this, I have to have that, I need to have that, please let me have that. It's endless. So the magnet just pulls our energy in, it redirects it, it cuts the sense telephone wires, just like your cell phone. If there's no battery, you can't talk to anybody. Nobody can call you. And so we make that spine very magnetic. The energy comes in, and then naturally, I love yoga that way. Naturally, we don't get pulled out. It's less, then not at all. Less, and then not at all. And this was proven over and over. Master said, I can take 5 of the worst type of boys, give them to me, and I'll have them practice Kriya in the way I tell them. And in 4 or 5 years, I'll make saints out of them. And you know the story of the bronze Buckaroo. It was, I can't remember his name at the moment, but I'll get it in a moment. But he was, Herb Jeffries was his name. And he was very debonair, very nice looking. He was a singer. And he came to Master, and he said he was a Hollywood star as well. He came to Master and he said, now I go to these different churches and they all tell me what I cannot do. He said, can you tell me what I can do? Everybody says, don't do this, don't do that. And Master said, okay, well, you like smoking, don't you? And he said, oh, yes. He says, well, you can continue. And he says, well, you like drinking, don't you? He says, yeah, I like. He says, you can continue. And he says, well, you like socializing, don't you? You know, that kind of a life. And Herb Jeffrey says, oh, yes, I like socializing. He says, well, you can continue. And he thinks, oh, this is wonderful. I can continue everything. The Master said, but I'll tell you one thing. If you do what I tell you, I bet you won't want to do those things. Isn't that a wonderful thing? And I met him at when he was older, near into Swamiji's life. He came to see Swamiji. And all I can say was he was very soft and very, very inward. And we all know the story of the alcoholic with the bottle and the mala, and he kept drinking, and Master didn't care. He said, just keep practicing Kriya. Just keep practicing Kriya. That desire will go away. And it did. The guy put the bottle down and said, why do I need this? And I've talked to many people who said, I stopped smoking. I stopped drinking. I stopped many things I didn't want to do. I stopped being angry. I stopped getting upset. I stopped being in moods because of Kriya, because I detached myself from the senses. And so this is our way. Just feel the magnet of the spine. Keep your spine magnetic. Keep doing more Kriya. Keep doing more Mahamudra, energization, Ananda Yoga. Pull your energy in. Like Krishna driving Arjuna's chariot, and those 5 horses represent the 5 senses. He kept pulling in. And then, of course, it also comes from devotion. And with that devotion, as that man who came to Master and wanted an interview, and he asked the first question. Now, I love that story. And I'll tell you in a minute, and I saw a man who came to Swami Kriyanandaji, just like that man. I was sitting right there. You just reminded me, just like that man. And he says, he asked his first question, some big, overly intellectual question. Master's answer was, love God. And then the man asked another question. Master said, love God. And then he asked another, he says, love God. And Master left the room. And the guy wouldn't understand anything because his heart wasn't open to God. There were too many desires, too much covering, too much shrouding him. And if we think of it in that way, with devotion, like that fellow Horace, who was it was just a beautiful story of his life, honestly. He was just so devoted to Master. Master said he's almost fully liberated. And people said, I mean, he could barely talk, he could barely walk. And people said, but, he seems kind of, like, how could he be free? And Master said, divine, it's his devotion. Divine Mother is very pleased with his devotion. And then they said, must be very simple devotion. And he said, that's what God loves. And then that man, at the end of his life, he couldn't do much, but he laid on the ground. He couldn't even walk anymore. And he just pulled up weeds out of the garden, just devotionally. That's all he could do. But he offered it to God. And you know the story of Dr. Lewis, who came to Master and he wanted to find God. And Master asked him, will you love me as I will always love you, at the very first meeting? And Doctor said he didn't know what to think. And it's the first time, here's an Indian guru. He doesn't even know anything about India and nothing like these and things. And Master, he looks at Master, and Doctor said, I could feel the love flowing. So I said, yes. And Master said, good, now I take charge of your life. And so in these ways, if we can open ourselves, we realize, I remember we were in Assisi and living there, and Italy has such a big heart. And we were there, and Swamiji said, I brought each one of you here so that you could open your heart. And I thought, my heart's open. He's not talking to me. Maybe everybody else needs to open their heart. My gosh, I realized afterwards how close my heart was. And we would chant all the time, and we hardly meditated. I mean, this was the early days when people were new and we needed to meditate only 20 minutes or whatever. And I said to Swamiji, I want to meditate. All we do is chant. He said, you need to chant, meaning you need to open yourself to God. And as we open ourselves in that way, we find that those blessings, they flow into us. I want to close with a very interesting story I was reading about from Devi Mukherjee's book, which is Shaped by Saints. And this is a story of Nayaswami with Devi Mukherjee. And he was visiting him in the Himalayas. And it was night time. And Devi was saying, I think I'll retire now. So Nayaswami says, that's fine, but After midnight, do not come outside. Just stay inside, no matter what. And he says, well, why? He said, there's a lot of tigers who visit, and don't come out. And he says, no, I want to see tigers. He says, just don't do it. So he stays in, and right just after midnight, there's 10, he looks out the window, and there's 10 or 12 tigers in the ashram grounds, on the ashram grounds with their cubs. This is a lot of tigers. And there's they've come to visit the Swami. And there's Narayan Swami. He's sitting there petting them like cats. They're rolling at his feet. He's playing with them. And Devi Mukherjee's eyes are getting bigger and bigger. He just can't believe it. And so then afterwards he says, how come I can't go out there? I want to pet the tigers. And he says, no, don't come out no matter what. The next night, the same thing happens. And finally, after that, the Swami, Narayan Swami comes in, and Devi just pleads with him. He said, please let me come out with you. He says, no, because your love, no, because Devi says, no, I love tigers. So you can think of it. He says, your love is only 60%. You need 40% more to pet tigers. And he said, they will make a sandwich out of you if you don't have 100% love. He said, you need to learn how to increase your love. If you have love, you can do anything. And I was recalling once, Jyotishji and Deviji and I went to a tiger reserve, Kana Tiger Reserve. And whoa, that was fantastic. I tell you, we saw, well, first we didn't see anything, and many people go. One man had gone, I think, 12 years, never saw one tiger. We knew we were going to see some tigers. We didn't know if we'd ever get to go back. And I was remembering we were there, and Jyotishji said afterwards, he said, because we saw, the first day we saw, maybe we didn't see anything, and then we started praying to Divine Mother. And Jyotishji said, I was praying, Divine Mother, if you want us to see tigers, please show us the tigers. We go out with everybody. And I think it was the second day, we saw 5 tigers all together, right close to the vehicle. And then the next day we see 3 or 4 more. I mean, we just saw tigers. Now why? Our heart was open to God. Our heart was, we wanted to see Divine Mother in nature, and our heart was open. And we saw more tigers than most people will see when they go to those kind of places in many, many years. Keep your heart open. Keep your Kriya strong. Pull back from the desires, from the wonderful tools that we have, and we will all find that we too will just rise up one day in ecstasy because we're so in love with God. God bless you.